Greetings and welcome back to the You Are Not a Machine YouTube channel. In last week's video, I introduced you to Professor Lance Strate, who was a student of the great media ecologist Neil Postman, and I discussed media ecology in a little bit more depth. If you haven't already watched that video, you might want to watch that before you watch the interview. If you have already watched that, I'm not going to say much more because I said pretty much everything I had to say about my time up at Fordham University where I conducted that interview. So I hope you'll enjoy my interview with Professor Lance Strate. Yeah, I hit me last night. I thought I had a bunch of other questions, and then I thought, you know what? Most people don't have no idea what media ecology is. It's a little bit of a esoteric term, and maybe somewhat amorphous. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely something, and it's something that brings a number of wonderful thinkers together, provides a space where they can intersect.
Right.
I don't know, would you consider René Girard kind of?
Media ecology?
Yeah.
I look at media ecology as an open system and a network, much like we think of the internet as a network. So there's no boundary in which you say somebody is or isn't part of media ecology. They're just perhaps closer to the core or further afield from the core. And there are distinctions we can make between, say, kinds of studies or discussions that are more media ecological or less so. So I wouldn't answer that, as he is or isn't. I could tell you that I know of individuals who consider René Girard to be a media ecologist. Mm-hmm. And it almost becomes a kind of game that we play where, well, do you think this person's a media ecologist? And then you can make an argument for supporting that based on the kinds of things that person has written or spoken about. So I will just say that there is support among media ecologists to include René Girard. And he's not somebody who's very significant in my work, but that's me, right? And I often like to say that there is no such thing as media ecology as a thing. There's what media ecology is to me, what media ecology is to you. Everyone's got their own idea of what it is, and they overlap to a significant extent, but they're not the same.
And what are some of the main principles behind media ecology?
Well, first of all, I would engage in disambiguation, to use the Wikipedia term, and say that what we mean by media ecology is not what comes up in journalism quite often these days, where they talk about the media ecology or the digital media ecology or whatever, where they're just talking about the interaction among different specific media of communication. And for us in media ecology, it is a field of study, a field of inquiry, and an intellectual tradition. So we talk about studies and authors and thinkers as being media ecological. And I would say, I always go back to Neil Postman's original definition. I think that was the best, that it was the study of media as environments, to which I add a small footnote because, technically media and environments are synonymous. We often don't think of them that way, but really a medium is something that surrounds and pervades us at every turn. We, say fish swim in the medium of water, we move through the medium of air, we see through the medium of light, and so forth. So I would say that media ecology is also the study of environments, study of environments as media. The rooms that we're in, the buildings that we inhabit, the structures, the cities, and the streets, all of these are also media that structure how we think and act and communicate and organize ourselves. So you could put it both ways. You could also just say it's the study of media as media, because most people just study economics and its effects on media, or politics and its effects on media. But we're looking at media themselves, for themselves, and how they are the prime movers, which is also the study of environments as environments. At the same time, since all these terms can be understood as interchangeable. So for me, the primary point is that we're looking at things environmentally, so that, say, a smartphone is not this gadget that I hold in my hand that I might choose to use or not use, and never, I might decide never to have one in the first place. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an environment in which there are smartphones, so that even if you never touched one in your life, you are influenced, you are shaped by the environment of the smartphone. Not to mention the fact that we go into it in a sense, just as we more readily say now, you go online, you go on the web. I mean, even something like Microsoft Word is called a word processing environment, because we go into them. So, and the key idea then is to think about these things, think about all the ways that we influence and alter our environment. And we do this continually in our kind of society, which then feeds back into us and then shapes ourselves. So with that, along with thinking environmentally or ecologically, I would say that the fundamental question for media ecology is how. It's that how we do things, or the way. If you're into Eastern kind of spirituality, the Tao, right? The way that we do things has an enormous impact on what we do. Right? It really structures what we can do and what we can't do. And what we choose to do is constrained and possibilities opened up by the way that we do things. And that in turn shapes who we are. It shapes our environment. It shapes who we are. So to me, the fundamental question is the question of how, the means, the method, the medium.
Thank you. Does media ecology have like a philosophical anthropology? I would imagine there are theorists who have talked about what it means to be a human. Mm-hmm. Is there kind of a general media ecology anthropology, or something that is agreed upon?
Well, first of all, I would say that media ecology can take just about anything as its subject matter, so that it intersects in significant ways with anthropology. And there are a number of important media ecology scholars that we consider to be media ecologists, who come from anthropology, such as Edmund Carpenter, who was a close associate with Marshall McLuhan, Dorothy Lee, who kind of bridged the gap in the world of linguistic anthropology, which is part of our field as well. And so going back to Benjamin Lee Whorf and Edward Sapir before that. But then later on, in terms of orality literacy, you get someone like Jack Goody. So, I mean, there are quite a few folks coming from anthropology who apply the media ecological approaches and take up media ecological questions. The question of what it means to be human, I would say, is a very important one for media ecology. Now, my book that I wrote on, which is entitled just Media Ecology, I gave it the subtitle, An Approach to Understanding the Human Condition. Because, and I would say that McLuhan's book, Understanding Media, actually downplays what the book is really about, because it is about understanding the human condition. And if it's just about understanding media, that's interesting and all that, but that's a kind of narrow idea. And what we're really about is understanding the effects of media on ourselves, which is the effects of what we're doing to ourselves. So there are different camps, I would say, within media ecology, because there's not like, it's not an ideology, it's not an ism, it's a way of thinking about things, a way of approaching, that's why I use the word approach, way of approaching particular subject matter. And if we're thinking about what it means to be human, at least for some folks, there's a question of a kind of what is natural or normal or typical for being human, and then how far have we gone astray through our development of more and more technology. But for others, there are ideas of that part of what it means to be human is technology, and as we continue to create new technologies, we are continuing to evolve ourselves and to make progress as human beings, and that is part of what being a human being is all about. Not to remain static and set in our ways, but to continue to develop ourselves. So I would say that both of these are ways of looking at what it means to be human within the field of media ecology.
Well, I'll definitely have to read that book, and I'm like I said, I'm very much enjoying Amazing Ourselves to Death.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Media Ecology book is like your kind of seminal?
Yeah.
Like that's the one.
It's the book I had to write in order to go to my grave peacefully. And if I didn't write that book, I would be a hungry ghost, I think is the Japanese concept of, I'd be haunting people like you. So that was one. And it was, my take on media ecology that I said I talked about writing back in the 90s and always got sidetracked or put things off, and so it really developed over that time. But I think that with that book, I've kind of largely nailed it, at least as far as my thinking is concerned on the subject. And part of it, and it's going back to the point about being human, is bringing in Hannah Arendt and her work on the human condition, which I find to be media ecological and fits in nicely, helps to provide a kind of good grounding for thinking about media ecology.
Wonderful. Hannah Arendt's definitely on my radar very much. Are there books, other people that have maybe written a similar book to your book on media ecology, or in response to it, are there other people that are like writing and thinking about it, I guess?
Well, I mean, there certainly are other people who are writing and thinking about it. And a lot of the work prior to it followed a different kind of pathway to introducing media ecology. That includes my first book, Echoes and Reflections, which was sort of based on the different thinkers. So it's like, here's a chapter on Marshall McLuhan, here's a chapter on Neil Postman, here's a chapter on Walter Ong, and so on through the big thinkers, and which is a perfectly valid way to go about it. And as I said, saying to you before, it's like, there is sort of, we could talk about the media ecology of Marshall McLuhan, which has certain kind of emphases and certain things that are not really dealt with that clearly or that well or ignored, as compared to, say, the media ecology of Harold Innis, which comes from a different background, with different points of emphasis and so on. So that actually is the long tradition going back to at least the 60s of people who tried to coalesce, whether they called it media ecology or not. But, and I'm thinking of William Kuhn's and the Post-Industrial Prophets from, I think it was around 73, that tried to do this and just went through, different thinkers and what their approach was. That's fine. For what I wanted to do with my media ecology book, though, was to provide a synthesis. And there were others who created their own synthesis in different ways. So, I mean, I would include Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy as a kind of synthesis, but it was limited to the orality literacy approach, or field. Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death creates a kind of synthesis as well, but it's very much directed towards a specific concern that he had with the culture. I mean, before that, McLuhan's Understanding Media represented a synthesis, and very much a pioneering work, but it had, again, it was limited by its time and what it was trying to work with. Joshua Meyerowitz is another one. No Sense of Place lays out a wonderful synthesis that's very much constrained by a social science kind of approach, and that deals with specific integration of traditional media theorists like McLuhan and Innes with symbolic interaction theorists Goffman and George Herbert Mead and so forth, which from my point of view is part of media ecology rather than two distinct areas. So I tried to provide the broadest possible integration and synthesis so that we can say, okay, here is an entree into the field in its entirety. And from here then, and at best, when we think about it with humility in terms of history, you can say, here I'm offering a step up. Please, put your feet here and take the next step up. So hopefully that will occur at some point. I don't know of anything that's quite gone that far at this point. But in terms of publishing and print media, it's really only a short time. It's been, I guess it's 7 years now since that book. But, things take time to circulate and percolate. And, as I said, it took me 15 years or more. I guess maybe about 22 years. I can't do the math offhand, but about a couple of decades to get around to it. So maybe by the mid-century we'll see something move things along.
Yeah. Is there so there's also the term cultural criticism. Are media ecologists, do they tend to be cultural critics? How do those two terms kind of interface?
Well, I think that's one way to operationalize media ecology is to engage in cultural criticism based on a media ecological approach. And I would say that was what Neil Postman was concerned with, and in fact that he wasn't concerned with developing an overarching theory, although, he pointed to that, but that wasn't his main interest. He was particularly concerned with addressing important matters, important issues of the day, and starting with education, which is really about, it's an applied area. How can we engage in? At first, he was looking at English education with recommendations for, spending less time talking about parts of speech and spelling and grammatical rules and more understanding what a symbol is, for example, and how language works, and then how media are the new languages that we are working with. And then later on with questions related to the culture as a whole. So, his best known work, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is a critique of the Reagan era and about politics and journalism, and just how television, looking at television, analyzing it from a media ecological point of view, which also involves the comparison of television to print, and how these different eras have led to different kinds of discourse. From Postman's point of view, where we once had very elevated discourse under typographic conditions, with the ascendancy of television, we get this degraded discourse and this loss of rationality that is undermining, among other things, American democracy. So that's very much cultural criticism. But not everything's about that. Like, say, Walter Ong's Orality and Literacy is just trying to understand and again synthesize an area of study and look at its ramifications. And he wasn't looking at whether this was good or bad. He wasn't critiquing the culture. He was explaining how we go from one kind of culture with its advantages and disadvantages to a different kind of culture with its advantages and disadvantages. And it's the same thing with McLuhan with understanding media. In fact, it's one of the reasons why folks who are both for the changes, people who are enamored of television and people who hated television could both get behind McLuhan, because he was just saying, love it or hate it, it's having a significant effect, and let's understand that. I mentioned Joshua Meyerowitz, before. Folks like him, coming from a social science point of view, particularly, they don't want to say it's good or bad, although they may see their inclinations in the way they address subjects, but they're trying to provide more of a sort of neutral view of what is the role of media. And again, in this case, television, electronic media, in the social changes. So we're seeing social changes. Now, what is the role of media and technology what is the relationship of media and technology, the relationship of the media environment to those changes? So, for me, criticism, that's reasoning from criteria. We have standards and we say, this is what we think is appropriate and this is what we think is not appropriate, or say, harmful or beneficial. And then, but people have different points of view on that. And Postman made that point as well. Like he had, and it always got a laugh when he would talk about Gutenberg and the printing press and say that, well, if you were a Protestant, you would have liked the printing press because that gave birth to Protestantism. But if you were a Catholic, you wouldn't have been so happy about it, right? And then he would say, well, being Jewish, it really doesn't matter who the pogrom is coming from. It's all the same, which is, of course, a cute way to put it. But the point is that different people have different takes. And so, a key question is, what are the criteria? Postman did try to come up with the criteria, does it make us better human beings? Does it promote democracy? And, based on criteria like that, we could, in fact, ask, is this better or worse? Or I like to put it, everything's got a cost. Right? And, there's a cost for whatever benefit that we get. There's no way around that. There's no free lunch. So the question is it worth it? And we run into this problem of we're constantly asked to buy into the benefit and not look at the price tag, not even think that there is a price tag, and that's a problem. But on top of it, it's all buy now, pay later, because there's no way to tell what the price tag is going to be until it's too late, basically. So what do we do, right?
Once it's too late, you don't even know.
Yeah.
Because it's almost invisible.
Yeah. Now, what that would suggest to me is that we should move ahead with, in a cautious manner, that we should not willy-nilly. But of course, that is all totally undermined by the fact of competition, where say, okay, if we're going to be cautious about it, but they're not. I look at just recently, it was just last year, where the folks involved with AI were saying, we better just stop for a while and assess what's going on. And within a month, that went by the wayside, because they're all competing with one another. No one wants to get left behind, whether it's in companies or it's in nations, whatever the groupings are. We're always going to be undermined by that, which brings us to, in a sense, Postman somewhat following Jacques Ellul, that it is not quite hopeless, but it's going to take something really drastic to break us out of this system, because we are just too wrapped up in this technological dependency, that comes with, we create technologies to solve problems that create new problems, because there's always that cost. And what do we do with those new problems? Well, let's get more technologies and solve them, but they're going to create more problems. And it is this cycle that goes on and on and on until, when we reach the point of disaster, of, if you like, apocalypse. Which for Ellul, who was a theologian, that doesn't just mean like Armageddon. It means revelation and true change that comes from it. So, but we have to be hopeful, right? We have to, and we have to think somewhere along the line. Well, I mean, if we can avoid that catastrophe, that game-changing catastrophe, maybe we can just grow the hell up, basically.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the soft landing would be, the lights get turned off when the fossil fuel become a problem.
Yeah.
And the promise that science and technology is going to solve all our problems is finally shown to be, not true. There are limits to what we can, the solutions we can find to get ourselves out of the problems that we've created. And then we don't have an option, as long as we can get to that point without having destroyed ourselves,
right?
In some other way, because it's not a sustainable system,
right? Long
term,
yeah.
You can't have 7-8 billion people living with American standards,
right?
We consume 20-25% of the world's material, and everybody wants to live like us,
right?
It's not possible. We'll destroy. So we're living in a fake world, like a non-sustainable world,
right?
And most people don't realize that,
right? And I mean, climate change, I think, is the most significant of all of these. And what are we going to do? It's obvious. And every step along the way, where we say we can't go past this benchmark, and we do, and we do, and we do. I think it's pretty obvious, because they're talking about it already. They're talking about shutting out the sun by, through a technological solution of shooting junk up into the atmosphere to block the sun, or maybe putting some kind of shield up into orbit, whatever that is, and have no idea what that, what the harmful side effects are going to be from that. But that's what's going to happen. You can guarantee it that is what is going to happen. And then we'll have to suffer the consequences of that, further kind of movement. Where we go, I mean, it just seems like it's almost unavoidable that we're going to get to catastrophe, because, as you said, because it just doesn't seem like we're capable of doing otherwise. So
yeah.
You just have to hope that it's not as so bad as to completely wipe us out and the planet with it, or at least not wipe us out and leave something left to move past what we have traditionally called civilization. There's an idea out there of post-civilization, which is kind of intriguing. But I mean, and it is, sort of pointing to something that's sustainable. And we'll have to get there.
The planet has everything we need.
Yeah.
If people could learn to live within their what humans have a insatiable desire for things.
Right.
Which until you can control that, and people realize what ultimately satisfies them. So one of the things I want to talk a lot about on the channel is what does it mean for humans to flourish?
Yeah. That's good. And, part of the problem is we just don't know when to stop.
Yeah.
Right. And you can see the problem with obesity, right? Where food scarcity was for everybody, throughout humanity. I mean, it was just generally a big problem going into the 20th century. I mean, and it still is a problem for people in many places today. But for a lot of people in the developed world, I mean, it is not a problem. The problem of having enough food to eat was solved long ago, but we don't know when to stop. And so you get to the point of obesity today as a real health concern. And then, so what do we do to solve it? Well, there's Ozempic, right? I mean, it's not eat less or exercise more. It's like let's have a drug. I mean, we're almost retrieving back the old Roman practice of the vomitorium. In a new kind of method. Rather than finding a different way to live our lives. And I mean, I say this from my own personal experience. I mean, it's tough. And that was Postman's point about information glut, that in the 19th century, not having access to enough information was a real genuine problem. But we solved it, but we just keep going and going and going until the point where we're overflowing with information and don't know how to make heads or tails out of it. And this is what opens the door. I mean, the terms disinformation, misinformation, in a way, they're not useful terms because it's all information. Information is not about truth. It's not about facts. It's just data that we're drowning in. And so, we've created artificial intelligence, and the AI will sort it all out for us. And that's our way of dealing with it, rather than just trying to bring it all down into a more coherent and relevant kind of framework, and provide tools for human beings to synthesize relevant information and to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. No, just give it to the AIs, and then who knows what that's going to lead to. It's definitely not empowering us as human beings.
Well, this is going back to tools, and the more tools you have, the weaker, the less agency humans have.
Well, that's McLuhan is like every extension of the human body is also an amputation.
Yeah.
And Sigmund Freud, long before McLuhan, wrote about this, that our technologies turn us into prosthetic gods. Which is wonderful, which is kind of anticipates the concept of the cyborg, that we're all cyborgs, we're all attached to our technologies, which extend our power and extend our bodies and minds, but also cut us off in very significant ways from our real world, from what's all around us, and that has very significant consequences. It really kind of cuts us off from reality.